Wake up. Freedom's on the rise.
Rise in billionaires has been, unprecedented during the pandemic, and there's been several sectors where that has been mostly concentrated. And one is, in fact, the pharma sector, because COVID has been one of the most profitable products ever. So that's one point to discuss, and our report out today is called "Profiting from Pain." How those delays in making this technology available and really having people vaccinated early has contributed to that. But has also, as was said earlier, it's not only the direct health impacts, but it's the economic, social impacts on all parts of the population, and in reality, an increase in inequality, reversing the trend of the last few years where inequality had reduced between rich countries and poor countries. Unfortunately, now it has widened. And the statistic we're saying is every 30 hours, a new billionaire was minted during the pandemic.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. And it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Well, it's pretty impressive that when you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector, get the delivery system so they're really getting the coverage out there, you literally save millions of lives. We see a phenomenal track record. It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else. The human benefit in millions of lives saved. So, we're here with a pretty strong message that although all these other issues are very important, let's not forget about the great success in global health and maintaining that commitment.
I think the numbers that you ran through were, if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah.
Rise in billionaires has been unprecedented during the pandemic, and there's been several sectors where that has been mostly concentrated. And one is, in fact, the pharma sector, because COVID has been one of the most profitable products ever. So, because COVID has been one of the most profitable products ever. So,
as World War III continues to develop, we now see new alliances being formed with Russia and China, promising to combat the United States and their alleged biolabs that are being housed in Ukraine. This is what it sounded like when the Russian foreign minister announced what they had found and what they're going to be doing about it.
Turning to the situation related to biological laboratories in Ukraine.
Uh-oh.
We commented on this yesterday.
Yeah.
And I would like to mention just the main points by the Russian MFA.
Okay. Main points.
We confirm
it. Come on.
Facts that were found during the special military operation that confirm the Kiev regime attempted to cover up biological programs traces as implemented by Kiev and financed by the United States of America.
We have biolabs that are being financed by the United States and are being covered up by the Kiev regime of, I guess, Nazis or whatever they're calling them. And that's just the tip of the spear. These weren't biolabs, according to the Russian minister, that were being used for peaceful purposes or just for research. These had no domestic purposes at all.
There was no peaceful use whatsoever, no research use whatsoever intended for the good of peace. They were financed from the U.S. Ministry of Defense.
And the U.S. paid for it. And so we can see that the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been, kind of communicating a lot of this for quite some time. This is what they posted on Twitter. You can see here, MFA spokeswoman Zakharova on military biological activity in biological laboratories says, quote, during special military operations in Ukraine, the Kyiv regime was found to have been concealing traces of military in their biological program implemented with funding from the U.S. And so this is something that they actually posted on their website as a press release, and we can go through this and detail a little bit more about what they're claiming happened here. They say, we confirm that during a special military operation in Ukraine, the Kyiv regime was found to have been seeing a lot of that. But what's interesting about this is they give us some details on what they claim that they have found. in the name of the different viral concoctions or bacterial concoctions or a whole plethora of different bad things. The plague you can see here, anthrax, we've got rabbit fever, cholera, lethal diseases on February 24th. All of these received from employees of Ukrainian biolaboratories. And they say that this included instruction from the Ministry of Health of Ukraine on the urgent eradication of stored reserves of highly hazardous pathogens that were sent to all the biolabs. And they go over and they say you can find a lot of this stuff on our Ministry of Defense on the Russian Federation. And this carries on, says that this documentation is going to be analyzed by specialists of nuclear, biological, and chemical protection troops. And they say, however, even at this point, we can conclude that the components of these weapons were being developed in labs in Ukraine in direct proximity to Russian territory. And they say the urgent eradication was ordered to prevent exposing a violation of Article 1 and the different agreements of which Ukraine and NATO are a part of. So in other words, I think they're implying that once this became known that they were going to be invading, there was an urgent move to go and try to eradicate these specimens before the Russians got their hands on them. The information proves that the claims we have repeatedly made, they say, is true. And they say we cannot rule out using the mechanisms of other parameters to investigate violations under the Biological and Toxins Weapons Conventions Act. This wraps up, we see here, decisive actions to strengthen this regime are required to prevent any activity from being carried out, to strengthen the foundation. And they go on saying we're going to promote and work towards increasing the strength of the framework to stop the biological weapons program. So they're kind of using the same tool that the United States was using, relying on these international treaties and agreements to say, well, we're just going to rely on those agreements to sort of maintain international order. We heard a lot of that from the Biden administration for a long time, saying that, we're going to support our partners and our NATO allies all the time, while sort of, moving just a small pittance of troops from location to location. Nothing really substantive going on there. Said a lot of it was all bark and no bite. And this wraps up, we see here, we've got one final addition. In addition, they're suggesting, sort of browbeating other people who are part of the BTWC, the member states, to also participate, in doing things like they're doing there in the Russia, saying only comprehensive steps like these are going to make it possible to move past all of this. And they're going to say to place the military activity of the U.S. and other people in their regions, make sure that they're comporting with their obligations under this international agreement. And Russia now is being joined by China, just to make sure that we have an entire sort of grouping of communism and death. These two are going to be paired up. And we can see that the Chinese came out. Spokesman here is reporting, says, follow us to know more about China's diplomacy. You can see YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all linked up here. This is a China government official, spokesperson at MFA China. And what we can see that they're telling us, the U.S. has 336 labs in 30 countries, all under its control. And they're telling us, including 26 in Ukraine alone, saying it should give full account of its biological military activities at home, abroad, and subject itself to multilateral verification. And all of this is coming from spokesman from the MFA, officially on Twitter. And this is what it sounded like when he made this announcement.
Recently, the U.S. biological labs in Ukraine have indeed attracted much attention. According to reports, in these facilities, a large quantity of dangerous viruses are stored. Russia has found during its military operations that the U.S. uses these facilities to conduct military plans. According to data released by the U.S., it has 26 labs in Ukraine. The U.S. has 336 labs in 30 countries under its control. The U.S. has also conducted many biological military activities in Fort Detrick. What is the true intention of the U.S.? What has it done specifically? The international community has long held doubts. Once again, we urge the U.S. to give a full account of its biomilitary activities at home and abroad and accept multilateral verification.
Can you believe these people? So this guy, the same organization, the same Communist Chinese Party, who were very much opposed and adversarial to the World Health Organization and many other people who wanted to go in there and poke around at the labs there in Wuhan, didn't get much cooperation from the Chinese. And so now the very first opportunity they get to jump on the bandwagon that the Russians have started on, claiming that there's all these biological weapons labs in Ukraine, which may or may not be true, I don't know. But they are going to be saying that we want a full and open investigation into what you're doing, because they don't want you to look at what they're doing. So we see this new alliance forming between Russia and China. Certainly feels concerning, certainly feels sort of familiar, like the pretext of other problematic alliances throughout this world's history. I want to hear from you. What do you think about all this? Are you concerned that this is the beginning of an Axis power? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend or family member. Invite them to come join us on the next one. I look forward to seeing you there.
Dr. Fauci, we don't know whether the pandemic started in a lab in Wuhan or evolved naturally, but we should want to know. 3 million people have died from this pandemic, and that should cause us to explore all possibilities. Instead, government authorities, self-interested in continuing gain-of-function research, say there's nothing to see here. Gain-of-function research, as you know, is juicing up naturally occurring animal viruses to infect humans. To arrive at the truth, the U.S. government should admit that the Wuhan Virology Institute was experimenting to enhance the coronavirus's ability to infect humans. Juicing up superviruses is not new. Scientists in the U.S. have long known how to mutate animal viruses to infect humans. For years, Dr. Ralph Barrick, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi Zhengli of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create superviruses. This gain-of-function research has been funded by the NIH. The collaboration between the U.S. and the Wuhan Virology Institute continues. Doctors Barrick and Shi worked together to insert bat virus spike protein into the backbone of the deadly SARS virus, and then use this man-made supervirus to infect human airway cells. Think about that for a moment. The SARS virus had a 15% mortality. We're fighting a pandemic that has about a 1% mortality. Can you imagine if a SARS virus that's been juiced up and had viral proteins added to it, to the spike protein, if that were released accidentally? Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute.
Do they fund
of
Dr. Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina.
You don't think inserting a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain of function?
That is not. You would be
in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain of function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain of function, despite the fact that people tweet that.
So do you still support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan Virology Institute.
Do you support sending money? We did, under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been infected.
Or perhaps it would be irresponsible to send it to the Chinese government that we may not be able to trust with this knowledge and with this incredibly dangerous viruses. Government scientists like yourself who favor gain of function research.
I don't favor gain of
maintain
function research
that
in
the
China.
disease
You are
arose
saying
naturally.
things that are not correct.
Government defenders of gain of function, such as yourself, say that COVID-19 mutations were random and not designed by man. But interestingly, the technique that Dr. Barrett developed forces mutations by serial passage through cell culture that the mutations appear to be natural. In fact, Dr. Barrett named the technique the no-see-'em technique because the mutations appear naturally. Nicholas Baker in the New York Magazine said nobody would know if the virus had been fabricated in a laboratory or grown in nature. Government authorities in the U.S., including yourself, unequivocally deny that COVID-19 could have escaped a lab. But even Dr. Shi in Wuhan wasn't so sure. According to Nicholas Baker, Dr. Shi wondered, could this new virus have come from her own laboratory? She checked her records frantically and found no matches. That really took a load off my mind, she said. I had not slept for days. The director of the gain of function research in Wuhan couldn't sleep because she was terrified that it might be in her lab. Dr. Barrett, an advocate of gain of function research, admits the main problem that the Institute of Virology has is the outbreak occurred in close proximity. What are the odds? Barrett responded, could you rule out a laboratory escape? The answer in this case is probably not. Will you, in front of this group, categorically say that the COVID-19 could not have occurred through serial passage in a laboratory?
I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done, and I'm fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China. However, I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain of function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. We have a committee to do it, but the committee has granted every exemption. You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing superviruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China, and it's a huge mistake to allow this to continue in the United States. And we should be very careful to investigate where this virus came from.
I fully agree that you should investigate where the virus came from. But again, we have not funded gain of function research on this virus in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, no matter how many times you say it,
there was research.
Happen.
There was research done with Dr. Shi and Dr. Barrett. They have collaborated on gain of function research where they enhanced the SARS virus to infect human airway cells, and they did it by merging a new spike protein on it. That is gain of function. That was joint research between the Wuhan Institute and Dr. Barrett. You can't deny it.
Senator Paul, your time has expired. Dr. Fauci, I will let you respond to that when we need to move on.
Excuse me?
I will allow you to respond to that, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, I don't know how many times I can say it, Madam Chair. We did not fund gain of function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Dr. Fauci, the government recommends everybody take a booster over age 5. Are you aware of any studies that show reduction in hospitalization or death for children who take a booster?
Right now, there's not enough data that has been accumulated, Senator Paul, to indicate that that's the case. I believe that the recommendation that was made was based on the assumption that if you look at the morbidity and mortality of children within each of the age groups, 0 to 5, 5 to 11.
Right. So there are no studies, and Americans should all know this. There are no studies on children showing a reduction in hospitalization or death with taking a booster. The only studies that were permitted, the only studies that were presented were antibody studies. So they say if we give you a booster, you make antibodies. Now, a lot of scientists would question whether or not that's proof of efficacy of a vaccine. If I give you 10, or if I give a patient 10 mRNA vaccines and they make protein each time, or they make antibody each time, is that proof that we should give 10 boosters, Dr. Fauci?
No, I think that is somewhat of an absurd exaggeration.
Well, that is the proof that you use. Your committees use that. That's the only proof you have to tell children to take a booster is that they make antibodies. So it's not an absurdity. You're already at like 5 boosters for people. You've had, 2 or 3 boosters. It's like, where is the proof? Now, I think there is probably some indication for older folks that have some risk factors. For younger folks, there's not. But here's the other thing. There are some risk factors for the vaccine. So the risk of myocarditis with a second dose for adolescent boys 12 to 24 is about 80 in a million. This is both from the CDC and from the Israeli study. It's also in the VAERS study, remarkably similar for boys, much higher from boys than girls and much higher than the background. The background's about 2 per million. So there is risk and there are risks. And you're telling everybody in America just blindly go out there because we made antibodies. So it is not an absurd corollary to say if you have 10. In fact, you probably make antibodies if you get 100 boosters. All right? That's not science. That's conjecture. And we should not be making public policy on it.
So, Senator Paul, if I might respond to that, we just heard in his opening statement Ranking Member Burr talk about his staff who went to Israel. And if you look at the data from Israel, the boosts, both the 3rd shot boost and the 4th shot boost, was associated with a clear-cut clinical effect, mostly in elderly people, but also as they gathered more data, even in people in the 40s and the 50s. So there is clinical data.
But not in children.
Well,
see, here's the thing is you're not willing to be honest with the American people. So, for example, 75% of kids have had the disease. Why is the CDC not including this in the data? You can ask the question. You can do laboratory tests to find out who's had it and who hasn't had the disease. What is the incidence of hospitalization and death for children who've been infected with COVID, subsequently going to the hospital or dying? What is the possibility if your kid has had COVID, which is 75% of the country's had COVID, what is the chance that my child's going to the hospital or dying?
If you look at the number of deaths in pediatrics, Senator, you can see that there are more deaths
of people who have had it, of people who have had the disease.
Senator, we also know from other studies that the optimal degree of protection when you get infection is to get vaccinated after infection. And in fact, showing reinfection in the era of Omicron and the sublineages, that vaccination...
But you can't answer the question I asked. The question I ask is how many kids are dying and how many kids are going to the hospital who've already had COVID? The answer may be 0, but you're not even giving us the data because you have so much wanted to protect everybody from all the data because we're not smart enough to look at the data. When you released data earlier, when the CDC released the data, they left out the category of 18 to 49 on whether or not there was a health benefit for adults 18 to 49. Why was it left out? When critics finally complained, it was finally included because there was no health benefit from taking a booster between the 18 to 49 and the CDC study. Another question for you. The NIH continues to refuse to voluntarily divulge the names of scientists who receive royalties and from which companies. Over the period of time from 2010 to 2016, 27,000 royalty payments were paid to 1,800 NIH employees. We know that, not because you told us, but because we forced you to tell us through the Freedom of Information Act. Over $193 million was given to these 1,800 employees. Can you tell me that you have not received a royalty from any entity that you ever oversaw the distribution of money in research grants?
Well, first of all, let's talk about royalties.
That's the question. No, that's the question. Have you ever have you ever received a royalty payment from a company that you later oversaw money going to that company?
You know, I don't know as a fact, but I doubt it.
Well, here's the thing is, why don't you let us know? Why don't you reveal how much you've gotten and from what entities? The NIH refuses. Look, we ask them. The NIH, we ask them whether or not, who got it and how much. They refuse to tell us. They sent it redacted. Here's what I want to know. It's not just about you. Everybody on the vaccine committee, have any of them ever received money from the people who make vaccines? Can you tell me that? Can you tell me if anybody on the vaccine approval committees ever received any money from people who make the vaccines?
Soundbite number one, are you going to let me answer a question? Okay, so let me give you some information. First of all, according to the regulations, people who receive royalties are not required to divulge them even on their financial statement, according to the Bayh-Dole Act. So let me give you some example. From 2015 to 2020, the only royalties I have was my lab and I made a monoclonal antibody for use in vitro reagent that had nothing to do with patients. And during that period of time, my royalties ranged from $21 a year to $700 a year, and the average per year was $191.46.
It's all redacted, and you can't get any information on the 1,800 scientists.
Your time is
So we want to know whether
Senator
or not
Paul.
people got money from the people who made the manufacturing.
Senator Paul,
vaccine.
your time is long over expired. I gave you an additional 2.5 minutes. The witness has responded. We are going to move on. Senator Sanders.
Mistakes, a failure of diplomacy, a failure to negotiate, a very harsh line against China, which is completely contrary to the actual needs of the planet, because we need cooperation everywhere. An us versus them mentality. So everybody is divided. Are you on our side or are you on the other side? We cannot function this way, because every challenge we face is not about us versus them. COVID was not us versus them. It wasn't about vaccine nationalism. It wasn't about accusations. It was about getting a pandemic under control. I'll add one provocative statement. We could take it up later. It may shock you or not shock you, or you may say, I already know that, Professor Sachs. But I chaired a commission for The Lancet for 2 years on COVID. I'm pretty convinced it came out of US lab biotechnology, not out of nature. Just to mention, after 2 years of intensive work on this. So it's a blunder, in my view, of biotech, not an accident of a natural spillover. We don't know for sure, I should be absolutely clear. But there's enough evidence that it should be looked into, and it's not being investigated. Not in the United States, not anywhere. And I think for real reasons, that they don't want to look underneath the rug too much. Well, that got us into a tremendous mess. Now we have a war that could have been avoided. It would have been avoided if the United States had not been so insistent on pushing NATO eastward and eastward and eastward.
Welcome back to Freedom's Rising, episode number 28. Today is July 19th, 2022, and we are in the Bio-PsyWar Barrage, Part 2. Wake up, freedom's on the rise. And you are participating in the rise of freedom, and we are freeing more minds here today with freedomsrising.live, the 24/7 live stream project that I launched back in June 2021, and we took some time to work on that over the last year. Brought back the Freedoms Rising series, launched that actually, and brought back the work from tylerbloyer.com, and we are continuing now into the Bio-PsyWar, and these are part 1 and 2 of the Bio-PsyWar Barrage, but on the tylerbloyer.com website you can find the category Bio-PsyWar. You can also find on the front page just the big image there that says Bio-PsyWar. Click on that and find the whole series of the Bio-PsyWar that we've done. If you try to go to YouTube or something like that, you'll see a playlist, but that playlist has holes in it. There are videos that were taken down. So we suggest to use Odyssey, to use BitChute, to use Float, to use these other technologies to follow Freedom's Rising and Tyler Bloyer. Myself, the Tyler Bloyer is the name that I go under on those channels. And then also find the links in the show notes where you can hop into the tylerbloyer.com Discord server. I'd like to have more of a community-sourced driven data stream driving through the Discord. For now, that's where we're at. There's a Telegram for Freedom's Rising. There's a Discord for Freedom's Rising, but probably the most active place, which is sort of tumbleweedish, actually, is the tylerbloyer.com Discord server, but you can still find me there and still be able to communicate, drop links. I'm not going to get into an argument. I'm not big on debating or getting into heated chat discussions and things like that. So, but more the open source community resource research projects that we could start, and people can participate by sharing their knowledge on the Bio-PsyWar, and those clips can even make it into the Bio-PsyWar stream, because that's what we're doing here is we are doing coverage from the front lines and documenting aspects of the Bio-PsyWar. So you heard opening up there Bill Gates talking about how great his ROI is on investments and how on vaccines, and that him and his groups that, he obviously influences have managed to make a tremendous amount of return in investing on vaccinations. And then we heard from the executive director from Oxfam at the international, at the WEF Davos meeting, or some recent meeting, and talking about how COVID has been one of the most profitable products ever, and there's been so many new billionaires minted in COVID. So talk about, taking an opportunity out of a disaster. Imagine even being in on some of the pre-planning, or people that knew about it beforehand, kind of like some of the stock trading and even like the insurance claims that lucky Larry Silverstein had around the time of 9/11. These people, when there's an economic catastrophe, when there's catastrophe in the world, there are people that know how to profit off that. I'm not saying necessarily judging that as a bad thing, but she did call it a product. I don't know if that was a Freudian slip. She called COVID a product and said that it was one of the most profitable products. So again, going back to, Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, basically saying to your face, this is our Great Reset. We are the ones that, have been behind this. And we've gone ahead and we've...
So we penetrate the cabinets.
We've extremely
so we
gone
penetrate
into
the cabinets.
And, penetrating the cabinets. Okay, so does that mean that, you've got control of these governments like Canada or even the United States, and now with COVID-19 and the Great Reset, are you basically admitting to carrying that out? And we have these ignorant fools up there saying that, COVID-19 was the most profitable product ever. And they're basically just telling you to your face, like, you're a dumb idiot, go back to Netflix, go back to watching whatever shit you watch at night and fill your brain with nonsense. And we'll just sit over here continuing to profit off your ignorance, to take advantage of this opportunity, to use this pandemic as an excuse to continue to mint new billionaires. And we saw with Klaus Schwab's, what is it? I wanted to say League of Gentlemen, but it's the world leaders, the young leaders, the young global leaders that are penetrating the cabinets. These people are placed all throughout the world, and he's even claimed people like Elon Musk as being one of the young global leaders. But here at Freedom's Rising, we do, under the name, we've got to generate the fire. We've got to get Freedom's Rising in more people's minds. We've got to free more minds with Freedom's Rising. So that doesn't mean we're definitely headed for that. It actually, if we sit idle, if we do nothing, if we just let life go by and eventually get to the point where it ends too early for some of us, and some people, unfortunately, through the effects of this pandemic, through the effects of the vaccinations, aren't with us here any longer on this planet. And at that point, you don't have time to work on this. You don't have time to try to understand what's going on and do something proactive about it. And that's what Freedom's Rising really is. We're documenting the problem, the solutions, and putting that on a record that can not be taken down, that's indelible. And if anything, trying to help at least the curious, at least the seekers, find the information, and hopefully they'll find it useful and share it out. I'm not necessarily counting on or hoping for some mass awakening by doing this work. It's almost more of a moral response and a moral situation that I feel like this work needs to be done just because of the big enough picture that I've been able to paint and seeing, what's going on to a certain extent, and then seeing that, well, this needs to be done, then we have to do this. I've got to create a way to make it sustainable for myself and make it more of a full-time vocational gig doing this work. But for now, I'm not going to create a lot of excuses and, I don't have my lead magnet yet, so how am I going to capture all these people trickling in? I mean, that's not my main prerogative here, but I do feel like it's foolish to sort of, wither into the nothingness and old age and never have something set up for myself where this can eventually not like benefit me as in I'm going to be some big millionaire, but make it so fans and people that want to support the show can. And so I have been thinking about, what does that look like? How do we make it done in a way that's not, cringy, but actually adds a lot of value to the audience? And, I offer my Discords for free. I don't charge for that. I just have an email sign up on my website. I don't have a lead magnet and all these things that I need to pitch. But is that foolish? Is that irresponsible? It could be. Anyway, going back to the show, and those things will come out more in the future, but we'll talk about that. But if you're listening to this show and you see that you're on episode 28, and let's say I'm now up in the future on episode 100, just know that at that point, if you're interested in helping and supporting and being a member and being an asset, or someone who can participate in building Freedom's Rising and help with the project, that there will be a light and ways to do that coming down in the future. But right now, we're really just trying to provide as much value up front as we can by doing these episodes. And also, like I said, I feel like it's a duty, and I'm not always going to have the energy or the time or the desire even to be able to do this sort of work. It's a lot of extra additional time spent doing these things when I have, a career, I have a family, I have, I'm struggling out there just like everyone else, and using the time that I have to the best of my advantage with the time that I do have here. And so we also heard in the opening montage from Jeffrey David Sachs, who was telling and saying, he thinks that this is a U.S. bio lab creation, basically, that COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. And if you look at SARS-CoV-1, the highly pathogenic SARS virus, and where the origins of that came from, it's also gain-of-function manipulation and biological lab creation. So it doesn't take much to understand that the number 2 of that would be, also a bioweapons biolab creation. It's not hidden in that way. It's just that there's so much mud thrown around and so much dust in the air, and the China, and it's a wet market, and it's even the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that leaked, and all these things that are thrown around to take away and detract from the true origins. And even if you just want to follow the money, as we heard, Fauci getting grilled by Rand there in the beginning. And I had to get that into the Bio-PsyWar just because all the stuff we covered with, Clint Richardson's Wag the Dog documentary, and, trying so hard last year in 2021 to show people, hey, look, Fauci's been involved in this stuff, not just Fauci, but his organizations, his people, and he's such a central figure. He's been in the government for so long. He's been serving in these positions in public health for a long time, that he's sort of this figurehead. But obviously he's not the only one involved. But we were heavily last year, before I took a break, covering that, and then to sit back and hear these committee hearings with Rand Paul drilling Fauci was like, it was somewhat of a moment like, maybe not like, oh, I made a difference there, but like we were saying that stuff and trying to point people to that information. It was going to come out anyways, but to hear it on a public stage like that, on a national stage, on a worldwide stage, and now those clips have been shared around. But then we also heard a more recent clip, and I had to get that into the Bio-PsyWar feed. So for those that have heard some of those clips over and over, or Bill Gates talking about his RO, Bill Gates, and you have to hear his little sad, pathetic voice in the beginning here. Sorry about having to do that, but we need to get those things into the record. We have to put those into the Bio-PsyWar, because those are very important sort of moment in this battle that happened, that now we've got them in an episode that can be, referenced back to, even though some of those clips are a bit older. But we did catch that more recent exchange with Fauci and Rand Paul, talking about the children's studies and the lack of data, and then like where exactly some of the money comes from, and Fauci's still stumbling and fumbling over. And in the gain of function clip, the one from 2021, it's like this mealy-mouth, like mixing of words, changing definitions. Oh, the NIH website doesn't say gain of function is that. We didn't fund that sort of research, when it's clear and obvious now that they did, and that Fauci has tried to use this like sophist reasoning and logic and display of dancing around the fact that there could be heavy ties back to him, back to the organizations that he's worked for and under and over, that link to this outbreak pandemic being some sort of accident, right? That they say. My opinion is that I don't think it was an accident, and we're not going to work only to prove that point, but we're going to uncover angles, and we're going to continue to dig and look at the information that's available in the Bio-PsyWar. And Jeffrey Sachs, he's basically like some kind of UN poster child. I mean, this guy, it says here on the Infogalactic, he is a Jewish American economist, academic, public policy analyst, and former director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, where he holds the title of university professor. He is known as one of the world's leading experts on sustainable development, economic development, and the fight against poverty. Sachs is the director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University and president of the UN Sustainable Development Solution Network. Now, people that know where these terms and things come from, I mean, you're being like gaslighted here. He's basically someone who's totally in on the agenda, sustainable development is nothing more than population control, which is nothing more than eugenics. It's nothing more than cybernetic systems that have been created to control people and control populations and reduce them and all these things, right? That sustainable development actually means. So when we give the power away to these people, what sort of techniques are they going to use to reduce the population? But anyway, he either, being a canary or some sort of a whistleblower, but basically was out there in the public saying that he thinks that this whole thing came from U.S. biomedical labs and biomedical research and gain-of-function research here in the United States. So that was an interesting clip to play in there. We also heard in the beginning, just to finish up, was the Russia and China form alliances against U.S. on Ukraine biolab issue from Robert Goive-esque. Watching the Watchers on Odyssey is where I found that video. And he's, going over the Victoria Nuland, after U.S. Secretary Victoria Nuland revealed the presence of U.S. ish biolabs in Ukraine, Russia and Chinese foreign ministers sprung into action demanding to hold the United States accountable for these projects. I think this is somewhat propaganda. Even the guy covering it is sort of just falling into the propaganda. And, you know, biolabs doesn't necessarily mean like bio-defense or bio-offense or bioweapons. And it could, I mean, I don't know, maybe even like a dentist office accounts for like some form of a biolab. But, you know, they're just like, oh, there's these biolabs everywhere. And that, I mean, I did think it was interesting if that translation was correct, that the Chinese foreign minister was warning that, you know, the U.S. has been involved in bioweapons research at Fort Detrick and would like to know more about what these biolabs are all over. And we're going to get into more of that. We're going to allow information. We're going to put information into the podcast at the end here that's going to help us uncover more of that angle and get into that. I mean, there is some interesting news floating about and things that we're going to cover. So let's get right into it. We have a lot to review and not enough time usually for me to be doing the reviewing, and that's also why we're putting in the clips to add the context, to add time that I can do in sort of post or pre-production, and then with the recordings and the times that I have to do it, we're going to be able to provide either just some commentary on the clips or even provide some of the information ourselves. Today we're going to be reading from an important article here from The Defender, from Children's Health Defense News and Views. And Children's Health Defense, I believe, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s site. And there's a lot of different authors and contributors to that now. And they have like a board of directors, and it's a big deal, you know. But Children's Health Defense, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the Waterkeeper Alliance and founder chairman of the Board of Chief Legal Counsel for the Children's Health Defense, reading here from the About Us page. He is also counsel to Morgan & Morgan, a nationwide personal injury practice. Kennedy is an esteemed author with a long list of published books, including the New York Times best-selling Crimes Against Nature. Mr. Kennedy was named one of the Times Magazine's heroes for the planet for his success in helping Riverkeeper leading the fight to restore the Hudson River. His reputation as resolute defender of the environment and children's health stems from a litany of successful legal actions he received recognition for his role in the landmark victory against Monsanto last year, as well as the DuPont case that inspired the movie Dark Waters in 2019. That's something I'm going to have to check out. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci, is something I have not gotten my hands on yet. I was trying to get it off LibGen the other day just to have it, and I think I'm going to have to do a purchase of that book and go through it, and maybe even do the Audible version, and maybe even have some appearances from that book in the Bio-PsyWar. Yes, I admit it, I haven't read the book yet, but I plan to, and I've heard it's just tremendous work there. But we're going to get into the article today, U.S. firms' ties to WEF DoD implicated in bioweapons cover-up, from April 8th, 2022, by Dr. Joseph Mercola. And I'd like to just get started in the article in the essence of time. And you'll be able to find the full article here in the notes. But it says, story at a glance. And then there's 5 bullet points. So they summarize, and then the article begins. So let's read these bullet points. Story at a glance. As evidence of potential bioweapons cover-up has started emerging, a company called Metobiota is gaining prominence. Metobiota's mission is to make the world more resilient to epidemics by providing, quote, data analytics, advice, and training to prepare for global health threats and mitigate their impacts, unquote. Its founder is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader graduate. Metobiota, next point, Metobiota investors include InQtel, a CIA venture capital firm that specializes in high-tech investments that support or benefit the intelligence capacity of U.S. intelligence agencies. Hunter Biden's investment fund, Rosetta Seneca, and the U.S. Department of Defense's Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, which contracted Metabiota to run operations in U.S. connected labs in Ukraine. DTRA being really nothing more than a DARPA organization. I mean, not to say it's nothing more, but the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is tied in with DARPA. I'm reading here now from the globalbiodefense.com, and it says the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is the intellectual, technical, and operational leader of the U.S. Department of Defense, DoD, the U.S. Strategic Command in effort to combat biological, chemical, and nuclear threats, while the DTRA Chemical and Biological Technologies Directorate, DTRACB, is part of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. It is DARPA's focal point for chemical and biological scientific and technical expertise. So now back to the article, just tying in, showing you how the DTRA is part of DARPA. And they are contracting with Metabiota to run operations in U.S. connected labs in Ukraine. In addition to having close ties to the WEF and its Great Reset agenda, Nathan Wolfe, the founder of Metabiota, has also served on the EcoHealth Alliance's editorial board since 2004. In 2017, he co-wrote a study on coronavirus in bats together with EcoHealth President Peter Daszak, PhD. EcoHealth worked closely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, where SARS-CoV-2 is suspected of having originated. Next point, Metabiota's global partnership are led by Andrew C. Weber, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense, who created DTRA. As evidence of potential bioweapons cover-up has started emerging, a company called Metabiota is gaining prominence. And now we're getting into the beginning of this article now. The article titled, U.S. Firm with Ties to WEF DoD Implicated in Bioweapons Cover-Up, an article from April 8th, 2022 by Dr. Joseph Mercola. Continuing on at the top of the article pretty much after the bullet points. The links between Metabiota and several key players in the COVID pandemic and or Ukraine lab's story are manifold. So there's no really simple way to unravel it in a logical sequence. That said, let's start with what Metabiota does and the connections of its founder and expand from there. Metabiota's mission. Metabiota's mission is to make the world more resilient to epidemics by providing, quote, data analytics, advanced and training to prepare for global health threats and mitigate their impacts, unquote. Through data analysis, they help, quote, decision makers across government and industry to estimate and mitigate pandemic risks, but they also claim to support, quote, sustainable development, unquote, which seems to have little to do with pandemic risk management. Of course, they're going to throw that term in there, right? Continuing on. That term, quote, sustainable development, unquote, is one promoted by Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum. It's part and parcel of Schwab's plan for a global Great Reset and transhumanist revolution, parenthetically, aka the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It is not surprising, then, to find out that the founder of Metabiota, Nathan Wolfe, not only has close ties to the WEF, but is also a rising star. He's a WEF Young Global Leader graduate and was awarded the WEF's Technology Pioneer Award in 2021. Metabiota and the Search for Pandemic Viruses is the next section. Metabiota was a core partner of a United States Agency for International Development, USAID, pandemic threat program called PREDICT, which also sought to identify viruses with pandemic potential. And just me speaking here, USAID is pretty much well known to be a CIA front organization you can almost just replace the word with CIA and their PREDICT program. Continuing on with the article here. Contractors funded through this program have included the EcoHealth Alliance, headed by Peter Daszak. The PREDICT program, directed by Dennis Carroll, appears to have served as proof of concept for the global virome project that Carroll founded. According to a recent investigation by U.S. Right to Know, USRTK, Carroll appears to have diverted government funds from a PREDICT program while he was running it to fund the personal side project, which was set up with the intention to collect, identify, and catalog 1 million viruses from wildlife in an effort to predict which ones might cause a human epidemic. Now the section Metabiota funding. Metabiota received funding from several interconnected organizations and agencies, including, and now we have 6 bullet points. So we'll go into those. Pilot Growth Management, co-founded by Neil, and this is the funding that Metabiota has received from several interconnected organizations, it says. Pilot Growth Management, co-founder by Neil Callahan. Callahan is part co-founder of the Rosamont Seneca Technology Partners, and he sits on Metobiota's board of advisors. The Global Virome Project, which reportedly paid or was planning to pay Metabiota $341,000 to conduct a cost-benefit analysis. In-Q-Tel, a CIA venture capitalist firm that specializes in high-tech investments that support or benefit the intelligence capacity of U.S. intelligence agencies. I'll just say parenthetically that the old LifeLog, Facebook, DARPA's category index of all what you're doing and saying and everything you ever did and posted online. Facebook, right? The organically grown company Facebook was invested in heavily by In-Q-Tel with seed money in the beginning. Surprise, surprise. Facebook's basically, working directly with the intelligence agencies to hand over all your data to them. That's no secret. We've covered that back in previous episodes in tylerbloyer.com feeds. The Cyber Panopticon, I think, was the episode. The Cyber Panopticon. Next line here. The U.S. Department of Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, specifically in 2014, DTRA awarded Metabiota $18.4 million in a federal contract for scientific and technical consulting services to the DTRA labs in Ukraine and Georgia. And that has a hyperlink and a reference. The people who wrote this article know how to use hyperlinks, so they've actually referenced a lot of what their claims are throughout the article, which you can find in the notes. Continuing on. By outsourcing work to private companies, DTRA is able to circumvent congressional oversight. Russia is now accusing the U.S. of funding secret and illegal bioweapons research in these Ukraine labs, and claim that it was a real reason behind its invasion. Rosamont Seneca, an investment fund co-managed by Hunter Biden. If Russia's accusations turn out to be true, this time may prove deeply problematic for the White House, as it means the Biden family were more or less directly involved in the funding of that research. Wolf has also received more than $20 million in research grants from Google, the NIH, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, just to name a few, and was a friend of the now deceased Jeffrey Epstein. In his 2012 book, quote, The Viral Storm, unquote, Wolf thanked friends for their support, including Epstein and Boris Nikolic. Nikolic, a biotech venture capitalist, was named, quote, backup executor, unquote, in Epstein's will. Epstein, who besides being a convicted pedophile and accused child sex trafficker, had a robust interest in eugenics. It is well known that he dreamed of creating a superhuman race of his own by impregnating dozens of women at a time at his New Mexico ranch. Epstein also managed to secure meetings with Bill Gates, whose family's history is also marked by an interest in eugenics and population control. Talking about William H. Gates there, right? His Big Papa Gates, who was a member of the Eugenics Society and someone who bill is basically just continuing on with that legacy of eugenics and implementing that with technological means. So, continuing on with the article, the next section is Metobiota's founder tied to suspect in COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to having close ties to the World Economic Forum and its Great Reset agenda, Wolf, the founder of Metobiota, has also served on the EcoHealth Alliance's editorial board since 2004. In 2017, he even co-wrote a study on coronaviruses in bats together with the EcoHealth Alliance's president, Peter Daszak. As you may recall, EcoHealth Alliance, a non-profit organization focused on pandemic prevention, worked closely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, WIV, in China, where SARS-CoV-2 is suspect of having originated. Daszak, who received funding for coronavirus research from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the U.S. State Department subcontracted some of that work to Shi-Zing Li at WIV, and was also the co-author on research projects at the WIV. Once rumors of SARS-CoV-2 being man-made first began, Daszak played a central role in the plot to obscure a lab origin by crafting a scientific statement condemning such inquiries as, quote, conspiracy theory, unquote. This manufactured, quote, consensus, unquote, was then relied on by the media to counter anyone pressing theories and evidence to the contrary. This despite the fact that he, in 2015, warned that a global pandemic might occur from a laboratory incident, and that's hyperlinked, and that, quote, the risks were greater with a sort of virus manipulation research being carried out in Wuhan, unquote. In 2021, 2 investigations into the origins of COVID pandemic were opened, one by the World Health Organization and another by The Lancet. And Daszak somehow managed to end up on both of these committees despite having openly and repeatedly dismissed the possibility of the pandemic being the result of a lab leak. And I'll parenthetically say here, and having to retract that article from The Lancet because it was entirely complete bullshit, and that he was just covering his tracks and making shit up. And then, basically saying it was, there's only way that this happened. It was a zoonotical thing. There was nothing else going on. Okay, so why are we listening to this person and having him head these investigations or be involved with them? So continuing on with the article. Interestingly, one of EcoHealth Alliance's policy advisors and a former Fort Detrick commander named David Franz. Fort Detrick is the principal U.S. government-run, quote, biodefense, unquote, facility, although Franz himself has publicly admitted that, quote, in biology, everything is dual use, the people and facilities and the equipment, and that's unquote. We've covered that a lot in the Bio-PsyWar, this dual use, this sort of pragmatic thing that we've got to do it, or the Russians will do it, or nature will do it, so we've got to create these things and then create the defenses for them, and then calling that only defensive. And there's nothing being done here to create actual weapons or to weaponize this research at all. But as the David Franz, the principal in U.S. government-run Fort Detrick, says that everything is dual use. It all has a double-edged sword. Continuing on. Metobiota and the DTRA. In late May 2016, Metobiota hired Andrew C. Weber, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. We covered them back towards the end of the Falling into the Movement Trap series, part 9, part 8, part 9. The Council on Foreign Relations to head up the global partnerships between 2009 and 2014. Weber served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense under then-President Obama. Weber is credited for creating the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, a combat support agency within the U.S. DoD, specializing in countering weapons of mass destruction, including biological weapons. And as mentioned earlier, the DTRA has reportedly funded Metobiota to operate U.S.-funded biological research labs in Ukraine. The DTRA and also has also issued a number of grants to the EcoHealth Alliance, totaling at least $37.5 million, including a 2017 grant for $6.5 million to, quote, understand the risk of bat-borne zoonotic disease emerging in Western Asia, unquote. According to a December 2020 report by The Defender, EcoHealth Alliance has tried to hide most of the Pentagon's funding that it had received between 2013 and 2020, most of which came from DTRA. The next section here is Medobiota's bungled Ebola response. And we are in the Bio-PsyWar Barrage, and we're bungling up the words here. Medobiota's bungled Ebola response. In 2016, CBS News published a scathing critique of Medobiota's response to the 2014 Ebola epidemic in West Africa. Medobiota had been hired by the WHO and the local government of Sierra Leone to monitor the spread of the epidemic. But according to an investigation by the Associated Press, quote, some of the company's actions made an already chaotic situation worse, unquote. In July 17, 2014, email obtained by AP, Dr. Eric Bertherat, medical advisor. Let me start that over. In 2017, in a July 17, 2014 email obtained by the AP, Dr. Eric Bertherat, medical officer at the WHO's Department of Epidemic and Pandemic Alert and Response, complained about a misdiagnosis and, quote, total confusion, unquote, at the small laboratory Medobiota shared with Tulane University in Kinama, Sierra Leone. According to Breitbart, there was, quote, no tracking of the samples, unquote, and, quote, absolutely no control on what is being done, unquote. This situation that the WHO can no longer endorse, unquote. He wrote, similarly, Sylvia Blyden, special executive assistant to the president of Sierra Leone, told AP Medobiota's response was a disaster, and then it quotes that. They messed up the entire region, she said. She called Medobiota's attempt to claim credit for its Ebola work, quote, an insult for the memories of thousands of Africans who have died. U.S. health official Austin Demby, who evaluated Medobiota's Tulane lab work at the request of U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention and the government of Sierra Leone, was also critical. The one email Demby noted used needles were left out, and there were no ultraviolet light for decontamination. The space was also too small to safely process blood samples. Quote, the cross-contaminated potential is huge and quite frankly unacceptable, he wrote. Anja Wolz, an emergency coordinator with Doctors Without Borders, told AP she witnessed Medobiota's workers entering homes of suspected Ebola patients without protective gear and leaving high-risk areas without performing any kind of decontamination procedure. She also accused Medobiota of miscalculating the severity and the outbreak, while insisting that they had the situation under control when clearly they didn't. Tulane microbiology professor Bob Gary was also critical of Medobiota's choice to have Dr. Jean Paul Gonzalez run the operation, as Gonzalez in 1994 had accidentally got infected with a rare hemorrhagic fever while working in a Yale University lab. He failed to notify anyone about the exposure for more than a week, a delay that put more than 100 other people at risk, and Gonzalez was ordered to take a remedial safety course, but according to Gary, such carelessness was a red flag. He didn't think that Gonzalez was the right man to teach Sierra Leoneans about Ebola, saying, quote, do you really want the person who infected himself with a hemorrhagic fever around explaining to people how to be safe, unquote? Gary asked in an email to Medobiota media representatives, Wolf defended his company, saying there was no evidence they'd done anything wrong. Some of the problems he had blamed on misunderstandings and other on commercial rivalry. Next section, lab accident, quote, most likely, unquote, yet least probable cause of COVID. In a March 28, 2022 report, U.S. Right to Know revealed the contents of a 2020 State Department memo obtained by the group USRTK, writes, quote, origin of the outbreak, the Wuhan lab, remains the most likely but least probed, reads the top line. The memo is written as a bluff bottom line up front, a style of communication used in the military. The identity of the author is unknown. And it says, quote, bluff, and that is, again, bottom line up front. And that's like where the header of that starts, right? The header is like bluff, so it's like, here's the bottom line. There is no direct smoking gun evidence to prove that the leak from the Wuhan labs caused the pandemic, but there is circumstantial evidence to suggest that the memo reads, apparently, drafted in the spring of 2020, the memo details circumstantial evidence for the lab leak theory, the idea that COVID-19 originated at one of the labs in Wuhan, China, the pandemic's epicenter. Quote, the memo raises concern about the massive amount of research on novel coronaviruses apparently conducted at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and nearby Wuhan Center for Disease Control Lab. The memo also flags biosafety lapses on both labs, calling the Wuhan Institute of Virology management of deadly viruses and virus-carrying lab animals appallingly poor and negligent. The memo provides an extraordinary window into the behind-the-scenes concerns about lab accidents among U.S. foreign policy leaders, and even at this time of inquiry was deemed a conspiracy theory by international virologists, some of whom had undisclosed conflicts of interest. I wonder who they're talking about there. Maybe Daszak? It continues on with this. The memo also calls into question these virologists' impartiality. Shi Zhengli, a Wuhan Institute of Virology coronavirus research nicknamed the Batwoman, has forged wide-reaching international collaborations, including with prestigious Western virologists, the memo notes. Suspicion lingers that Shi holds an important and powerful position in the field in China and has extensive cooperation with many international virologists who might be doing her a favor, it reads. The memo laments that the most logical place to investigate the virus origin has been completely sealed off from the inquiry by the Chinese Communist Party. The memo even suggests that the other hypothesis that has served as a distraction from the probe of the city's extensive research on novel coronavirus, saying, quote, all other theories are likely to be a decoy to prevent an injury into the WCDC and the WIV, it states. And we're still continuing on with this report from the U.S. Right to Know revealed the contents of the 2020 State Department memo obtained by that U.S. Right to Know, and the points that were made in that article. So finishing that up, the memo laments that the most logical place to investigate the virus's origins have been completely sealed off from inquiry by the Chinese Communist Party. The memo even suggests that that other hypothesis may have served as a distraction of a probe of the city's extensive research on novel coronavirus. All other theories are likely to be a decoy to prevent injury into the WCDC and the WIV, it states. The memo cites a 2015 paper co-authored by Shi titled A SARS-like Cluster of Circulating Bat Coronaviruses Shows Potential for Human Emergence that describes creating a chimera or engineered virus with a spike protein of a coronavirus from a Chinese horseshoe bat. Editors at Nature Medicine added a note in March 2020 cautioning that the article was, quote, being used for the basis of an unverified theories that the novel coronavirus caused COVID-19 was engineered, unquote, but the memo shows that the State Department indeed considered the paper relevant to the pandemic's origins. Okay, just glancing at how much article is left and how much time I have got left today. And it looks like this will be a two-parter that we'll have to continue on with this article in tomorrow's episode, as I will run out of time today. And I know that's like, oh, well, fuck, dude, why don't you just record this when you have the time? Or why aren't you? And it's because of the schedule I've created and the amount of trickling out these episodes that we're trying to do. I have a limited time. When that time's done, I'm going to stop. Then we'll continue on the next day. And that might actually help to sort of leapfrog with what we're going to be butting on to the end of this episode and coming back to cover the rest of it synchronistically or whatever you could call it. That actually usually works out pretty well. So I'll continue on here with the article from the Defender Children's Health Defense News and Views. U.S. firms with ties to the WEF DoD implicated in the bioweapons cover-up. We are down to the section NIH retracted gene sequences at WIV researchers' request. And you are listening to the Bio-PsyWar Barrage Part 2 here on Freedom's Rising, episode number 28. And I appreciate you for hanging in there. While we've yet to obtain bulletproof evidence that SARS-CoV-2 was developed as a bioweapon, there's plenty of circumstantial evidence that points in that direction, and that's a hyperlink. Disturbingly, as time goes on, more and more circumstantial evidence seems to highlight the United States, quote, involvement, unquote, in the proverbial finger is pointing at China. If one proverbial finger is pointing at China, 4 others are pointing back at us. This is profoundly bad news, but it really ought to strengthen our resolve to get to the bottom of it. None of us are safe until the mad scientists responsible for this pandemic are brought to justice. It doesn't matter who they are. In all likelihood, we'll find that blame cannot be pinned on a single nation. At a bare minimum, the U.S. and China appear to be covering for each other. And I'll say, well, porting down. Don't forget the UK. Don't forget their involvement in any of the research, or don't look into that, Anyway, I don't think Mercola is trying to keep us from that. I think he's trying to stick to the data here, and we'll do that as well. So we're going to continue on. As just one example, there are deletions of information that have occurred both at the National Institute of Health and the WIV, either at others' request or as what appears to be a favor. As reported by the Just-in-Time News, the NIH deleted a genetic sequencing submission of the SARS-CoV-2 from its Sequence Red Archives SRA at the request of the researchers at the WIV. Emails obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request to the NIH by empowered oversight shows the WIV researcher who had submitted 2 genetic sequences to the SRA, one in March of 2020 and a second in June of 2020, asked to have the last one retracted. The NIH initially stated that it would be better to edit or replace the submission rather than retracting it. But the researchers insisted it be removed, which they did. To be fair, the NIH also stated it has retracted at least 8 SRA submissions in total, most from American researchers at their request. However, emails also show the NIH directed reporters on how to provide more favorable and less sensationalized coverage of the deletion of the Chinese sequence. Just the News writes, and it's hyperlinked, and what they wrote is here. Empowered Oversight says one of the most disconcerting elements of the emails is evidence showing that the NIH refused to participate in a transparent process to examine data on the deleted sequences. Most importantly, why has the NIH refused to examine archival copies of deleted sequences in an open scientific process to determine whether any of the information might be able to shed the light on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic? The group asked. And it says, and that's still continuing on from the excerpt from the Just the News article. However, the argument was dismissed by the NIH official Steve Sherry, although sequences are never fully deleted. According to the agency, Sherry told a researcher who asked for transparency, quote, "As you know, when the data sets are withdrawn from the database, that status does not permit us any further analysis," unquote. And let's see here. Okay. I'm just kind of reading ahead. I'm excited to get into the rest of this and finish off this article by Mercola. I think, again, we'll have to get to that tomorrow. Those who are proactive and listening to this can obviously find the link in the show notes and continue on with that. But we'll stop there at the WIV deletes mentions of U.S. collaborators in the article. And what we're going to do here now is jump into someone whose work we mentioned yesterday, Dave Emery. And Dave Emery does the show For the Record and many other series that Dave has done over the years, but the main one being For the Record. And again, this individual has done a tremendous amount of public service going back, 20 years, 22 years, or even further, back to the 80s, really. With Uncle Sam and the Swastika, I believe, was recorded like way a long time ago. I might be wrong, but I think it was like late 80s. And just has now, up into his later age, continued on doing this public service. And I'm much appreciative of the work that Mr. Emery has done. I think he does a good job of covering the data and keeping it interesting, and also has way more context and intellectual insight into these topics than someone like myself. So we don't pretend to know it all here. I'm a student, an explorer, and in this show, somewhat of a navigator to help you weed through the information and bring it to light and put it in a format that's more transportable, that can be easily digested by folks. Again, I picture myself out gardening, mowing the lawn, doing things and activities, and I've usually got an earbud in, I've usually got something playing, a podcast, a phone going, and really rely heavily on people putting out audio versions of things. Myself in particular, I'm able to consume it that way. I know some people are not, so I'm serving to the audience like myself that might appreciate these audio format podcasts. I was reviewing some of my recent work today with the video, and the whole setup I have here, it's still here. It's in different pieces, have been moved around. I've utilized some of the equipment in other places in my home, but I would like to get that studio back up and running one day. Does it add to the production value? Absolutely it does. Does the way that I have it now, where I can sit down and record and get it out and not have as many issues and technical problems, and can do it work as well? Yes, I think it does. I don't think in the long run, my face being on the screen and having the images is going to matter as much. In some cases, it's easier to show a document, to show how something looked. That obviously is a limitation in an audio format only. I think the solution to that is, once we build up enough steam and have a nice audience and people listening, we can start to schedule live shows. And maybe like I'll cut out the Thursday show from the podcast and prepare like a Thursday night live or something, right? And we can go into having a live interaction, and doing it live is definitely adds complexity. I don't heavily edit these episodes are basically live. But anyway, I could kind of continue down this rambling for a while. But what I'd ask to do for now, again, is to sign up for the emails. I send out episode updates via email, and other important updates at tylerbloyer.com. You can easily find out how to sign up there. It's on all the posts at the bottom, and also there's a pop-up, and in the menu bar you can sign up. And let me know if there's any issues with that. I know that there was some bugs with that plugin that I was using a while back. I need to run through and test that myself to make sure it's working. But also, again, what we're going to be getting into here is context for this episode, to get into For the Record 1251, Pandemics Inc. Oh, wait, that's not the one we're going to do. Hold on. Let me pull up the right episode that we have queued up here. It's actually, for the record, 1248, The Ukraine War Meets the Oswald Institute of Virology, Part 1, and that's a 3-part series so far. This was recorded on June 11th, 2022, and I wanted to play Part 3, but I felt like, we don't want to bring people in to that, but I think that the whole series is good. I don't know if we'll play the whole series here in the Bio-PsyWar, but I think what we will do is get you started here today with Part 1 of that series. Again, you're not going to be able to go through all of Dave Emery's work in a lifetime, but you can order like a USB drive that has a bunch of anti-fascist books and his whole life's work on it, and you'll hear him pitch his calls to action. You'll hear him pitch his lead magnets, right? And we're going to let that all through. We're going to play the whole episode. We're going to let Dave's style and his shine come through here at the end. And thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoy this piece. And we'll let Dave, like I said, open up, and he does his spill. He does his calls to action. He has his own way of opening up his own show. And we're going to keep it intact. We're not going to cut it out. We're not going to take clips from it. We're going to play the whole thing. And then we're going to end with the ominous, fortuitous sort of future-looking and ominous warning from Eisenhower in his farewell address, where we've all heard him talk about the military-industrial complex and how we've got to watch out for that. And now we see where we're at, right? We see that we have these mad scientists reigning over these DTRA and funding going around, funding these chimeric viruses being created. And, oh, whoops, it was accidentally released, even though, we see that PNAC document that we talked about, how a biological, basically race-specific bioweapons can be used as good political tools. And we can use that. And so, again, my theory is that this has been planned from early 2000s, back in the anthrax days, to have these viruses leaked out, leaked, quote unquote, out into the world, and then have the problem, reaction, solution, response. Oh, we're going to have to get the vaccine passports, and we're going to need to track more about everything that you do. And, oh, by the way, why don't we save the planet while we're at it and reduce your carbon footprint down, and have you start eating the bugs while we work on...
penetrate the cabinets.
And we penetrate the cabinets. And you will just bow down to the Fuhrer. Basically, the neo-Nazis are in control, and the world is being ran by psychopathic Nazis who are using their techno-communist agendas to cull and control the masses. Anyway, what we're going to do here is heed that warning and keep an eye on these folks through the Bio-PsyWar Barrage. We'll be back with Part 3. We will continue on with the article that we were reading from the Defender Children's Health Defense by Dr. Joseph Mercola. For now, we're going to get into Dave Emery's For the Record episode, which is, I just want to make sure I get the title right this time, The Ukraine War Meets the Oswald Institute of Virology, Part 1. And then we'll finish off with Eisenhower, and we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you then.
Hi, Dave Emery here. This is For the Record program number 1248. The Ukraine War Meets the Oswald Institute of Virology. This is being recorded on June 10th of the year 2022. Before we get into the main body of the program, as always, some links. These are at the top of each written for the record description on the SpitfireList.com website, and at the top of each food for thought post at the left-hand side of the front page, again, of the SpitfireList.com website. One of those links will enable you to obtain the 32-gigabyte flash drive containing basically all of my 43 years worth of work, both audio and print, plus all of the comments. More about those in a minute. This basically is everything that is on the SpitfireList.com website. And again, has the better part of a half century's worth of work by yours truly, plus a mini library of old anti-fascist books on easy-to-download PDF files. As I've said so many times, and this grim program, the first of a 2 or 3 part series dealing with things that I really wish weren't happening. But this will underscore perhaps my very sorry conviction that we are at the end of our civilization. And I think at the risk of seeming very pretentious or corny, I think that as sentient beings, I think we all have a responsibility, a karmic responsibility, so to speak, to preserve the record of what happened to our society for generations to come, assuming there are generations to come, because, as our old joke has it, our dogma is going to be run over by our karma, and it is just, not good at all. But anyway, all of the SpitfireList.com website is on a 32 gigabyte flash drive, which is yours for a very nominal and tax-deductible fee. I get no money whatsoever from that. Now, another link, again, at the top of each Food for Thought description and at the top of each Food for Thought article and each For the Record description, will enable you to subscribe to the comments that were made, usually by our brilliant contributing editor, Pterofractal, sometimes by other people. With all that is going on in the world, there is much too much for me to contribute and cover even in a 1-hour weekly program. So increasingly, those comments are, I think, fundamental for people who wish to stay well informed. And Pterofractal's been doing a great job. So have other people as well. So you can subscribe to those comments. Also, there is a link which will enable you to subscribe to the podcasts that are being made by sister station WFMU. So if podcasts are the best way for you to consume the program, and in the media landscape of 2022, that is increasingly the case, then sister station WFMU is podcasting for the record. And also, I have begun a Patreon site, and there is a link at the top of each written For the Record description and each Food for Thought post for you to participate in the Patreon material. I'm doing 3 1-hour, often more than an hour, plus recorded segments each week. We were going to have edited transcripts. I think maybe what we'll do, I'm still working on this, is we'll have the unedited transcripts. They're raw. They're kind of like the old Google translations, but they will give people something printed to hang on to. And we're also doing bi-weekly Zoom Q&A sessions. The Patreon material is still very much a work in progress, and we should have a more concrete grasp on what we're going to be doing fairly soon. But with 3 1-hour talks per week, a much more informal mode of presentation than these admittedly very pedantic For the Record programs. Again, I can cover much more material than I can in a 1-hour broadcast. So that is the last of the 4 links that will enable you to flesh out your understanding. Now, as for the topic of this program, it will be at least, I think, a 2-part series, maybe 3. There have been developments coming to light that have twined the investigation into the genesis of the coronavirus with the Ukraine war. There has been material that has been recovered from Hunter Biden's laptop that has been confirmed by, among others, the Daily Mail. And Team Trump was looking for that laptop so they could get all sorts of dirty stuff on Team Biden, and there is apparently plenty of smutty and drug-related stuff on there. But there were also some things that were very devastating indeed. And it turns out that Hunter Biden was expediting participation by a firm called Bio in Ukraine, and Bio has been heavily involved with biological warfare research. As we looked at, Bio was also very much hooked up with the EcoHealth Alliance, one of the main apparent intelligence fronts involved with what I call the Oswald Institute of Virology, also the Wuhan Institute of Virology is its correct name. There has been a development in the investigation into the biological warfare labs in Ukraine that it really is very frightening in our contemporary media environment. There is I guess with Cold War 2.0, McCarthyism 2.0 has kicked in, and now anybody who is saying anything that is critical either of Ukraine or the Ukraine war, or even talking about things that are very well documented, such as the fundamental role of Nazi elements in the Ukrainian national security establishment and on their political landscape, is branded a Putin dupe or a Russian dupe or a Russian collaborator or what have you. And something very similar is going on with regard to China as well. I would note that in the exhaustive series I have done about what I call Bio-PsyWar Apocalypse, and then eventually the long Oswald Institute of Virology series. Almost all of the material was taken from Western sources, and I think with the exception of a South China Morning Post article, that's very credible, by the way, Chinese publication. I think Jack Ma actually owns the company that publishes it, and I think there was also a brief segment from the Global Times, but almost all of that exhaustive series. I think I began that, I know the first program I did about the pandemic was, for the record, 11/11, and I wrapped up the Oswald Institute of Virology series with, for the record, 1193. There were a few in there, so I'd say about 70 hours, and then added to that with, for the record, 1215. So in some 70 hours of programming, almost all of it is from Western sources. One of the allegations that was made by Russia in a UN session, there have been a couple of them, one of them on April 6th, was that there were, among the projects that were being run in Ukraine, involved using birds as vectors for various genetically engineered biological warfare weapons. There has been a further development of that, and I would note that I think it is extraordinarily unlikely that the Russians are using Hunter Biden's laptop, nor are they using the Daily Mail from the UK, which, although they're a right-wing paper and they have a fairly overt tabloid spin to them, I guess you could say, or bent to them. They do some good articles, and I've accessed Daily Mail articles for many years, periodically. But I don't think the Russians are using either Hunter Biden's laptop or the Daily Mail. And I would note that the West has completely boycotted or blacked out any mention of those Russian UN Security General Assembly meetings. One of the claims that they made, and we've covered this in the past, was that there were birds, migratory birds, which were implanted with digital chips that were monitored by satellite, and they were also equipped with capsules that contained microbes, pathogenic microbes, viruses, and or bacteria. When the birds, and again, the implanted chips are monitored by satellite. When the birds are over a country that is targeted, they are killed and the capsules are released. There is a very important and long article that we are going to be accessing. We have accessed many articles from this website before, and it is done by a very skilled writer. The website is Organic Consumers Association, and from their website of April 22nd of 2022, there is another very important, excellent article by Alexis Baden-Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R, Is Bird Flu Being Weaponized? And this talks about the avian H5N1 avian flu. That is a very deadly avian flu, deadly for birds. It rarely affects human beings. Something that we have spoken about in numerous programs is Gilead Sciences. That is a firm that developed remdesivir, initially touted as a treatment for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Later, however, it turned out that it was only possibly effective. The WHO, the EU, and WHO have severely downgraded their opinion of remdesivir. We've noted in the past that remdesivir had developed, among other things, an antiviral agent called Tamiflu, specifically designed to counteract H5N1 should it adapt to human beings. The top dog, so to speak, with Gilead Sciences, the chairman of the board for many years, was none other than the late Donald Rumsfeld, a key player in Republican White Houses dating back to the mid-70s, and obviously the Secretary of Defense during the Iraq invasion and during George W. Bush's terms. Obviously, Donald Rumsfeld was not in the position he was in because of his medical or scientific expertise. As we noted, among other things, Donald Trump had the Pentagon stock up on Tamiflu, again designed to counteract a human human adaptation of H5N1, which fortunately did not happen globally. And Donald Rumsfeld, I was about to say Donald Trump, Donald Rumsfeld also profited handsomely from his stock holdings in Gilead Sciences while his Pentagon was stockpiling Tamiflu. There are indications that, in fact, the genetic engineering of H5N1, which we have also spoken about, may have been accomplished, or they were working on that in Ukraine. Russia has alleged that. And in this article, again, by Alexis Baden-Mayer, Is Bird Flu Being Weaponized? Published by Organic Consumers Association from April 22nd of 2022. There is a long discussion of H5N1 and the gain of function manipulations on the virus that causes that under the auspices of Anthony Fauci and other elements of the U.S. medical and military I guess we could call it the medical military complex. I would note that Anthony Fauci has been a bête noire for the Trump right. He is not by any means without blame. I do think that there is perhaps inescapable rhetorical overemphasis on Anthony Fauci. He is no more than a bureaucrat and a cog in the wheel, and is apparently doing the bidding of more powerful forces who are operating behind the scenes. However, he has given a green light to gain-of-function manipulations of the H5N1 virus that have made it much more transmissible, and may have made it transmissible to human beings. There was no recorded outbreak of H5N1 in human beings until 1997 in Hong Kong, when that former British colony that was conquered during the Opium Wars was handed over to China. That very same year, there was an H5N1 human outbreak in Hong Kong, something that had been predicted by an Australian researcher named Kennedy Shortridge. And Kennedy Shortridge, in turn, is part of a network of scientists who figure prominently not only in manipulations of H5N1 and the gain-of-function manipulations of H5N1, but also in biological warfare research and or theorizing. I take a lot of ribbing, perhaps deservedly, for using the word milieu so often. There aren't a lot of good words for milieu, perhaps network. People want to understand why I use the word milieu so much. The H5N1 concatenation here involves an important group of people who are basically a milieu. There also in this article is a very important discussion of the evolution of metabiota that in turn is hooked up with the EcoHealth Alliance and the research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology that I had termed the Oswald Institute of Virology. I believe it was set up to take the fall for SARS-CoV-2. There is a very chilling bit of information about the evolution of metabiota. I'm going to read some of the, well, you could maybe call them highlights. Lowlights might be a better term for it. And then we're going to go ahead and read the article. I'm sure take at least 2 programs, perhaps 3. As you listen to this, the article, keep in mind not only the allegations that were made by the Russians in the UN, of course, that is being poo-pooed as, Russian lies, Russian propaganda, you name it. Bear in mind also the article from an Indian blog that talked about research at the Bharatpur migratory bird refuge in India, and that was being conducted by the U.S. Army in the late 1960s or 1970s to see whether migratory birds carried pathogenic microbes. Also, we looked at some material from the book Bitten by Chris Newby, where Daniel Sonnenschein had done research in the late 1960s in the U.S., where Lone Star ticks, a virulent biting tick that carries disease, were planted in what was known as the Atlantic Flyway, where migratory birds migrated between North and South America, and subsequently there were established colonies of Lone Star ticks as far north as Maine, where they had never previously been discovered. So it is against the research that was done in Bharatpur against the allegations made by Russia in the UN Security Council of April 6th. Anything Russia says now is being roundly dismissed as a lie. That is tragic and may prove deadly, and also against the background of the research that was done by Chris Newby and that Daniel Sonnenschein was engaged in the U.S. in the late 1960s. This also falls against the background of the research we have done on Gilead Sciences, their work at the Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, and the research that they were apparently engaged in Ebola treatment via remdesivir. The AMRIIB was closed down in early August of 2019 by the CDC for unnamed security or sanitation violations. The precise nature of those has been buried beneath the national security cover, I think, predictably. And I think it is unlikely we will ever know the full truth about that. Much of the information that was alleged by Russia vis-a-vis the biolabs in Ukraine has been confirmed from material that had been online that was taken offline by the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine when the Russians invaded. It was, however, subsequently stored by the Wayback Machine, and I put that information in some of our past programs. Now, some key names in this milieu from the Alexis Baden-Mayer article from 4/22/2022 is bird flu being weaponized. Now, the emergence of the H5N1 human variant in Hong Kong was eerily predicted by Kennedy Shortridge, the scientist who would discover it. H5N1 did not infect human beings until Shortridge and his colleagues had been studying its human infection potential in their labs for several years. At the time, the natural leap of a flu directly from poultry to humans was so improbable that scientists first suspected that it was the result of contamination from Shortridge's lab. These are excerpts from the article. Now again, normally H5N1 human infections are extremely rare. H5N1 hardly ever infects people. News about highly pathogenic avian influenza usually leads with how deadly it is. Rarely is it mentioned that the disease hardly ever infects people. H5N1 kills more than half of the people who get it, but H5N1 has circled the globe for decades, and there have been only 860 human infections worldwide, and that again in a period of decades. And more about the rarity of human infections by H5N1. There has never been an H5N1 pandemic, and no human infection with H5N1 bird flu has ever been identified in the U.S. That is an extraordinary safety record, given how filthy U.S. factory farms and slaughterhouses are, and how fast the infection spreads among crowded birds. So far in 2022, 29 states have reported outbreaks of bird flu in 213 flocks, resulting in the culling of nearly 31 million birds, including almost 5% of egg-laying hens. In 2015, it was even worse, with 50 million birds culled, but there wasn't a single human case. Now, Anthony Fauci, again, is the person who has green-lighted gain-of-function research on H5N1, and we're going to talk about the various members of this milieu at the end of this reading of excerpts. Anthony Fauci has made significant investments in gain-of-function research to give H5N1 pandemic potential, making it easily transmissible from person to person, and Bill Gates chipped in too. In February 2006, Fauci convened a one-day in-house NIAID influenza research summit to identify influenza research priorities. In September, he opened up the topic to a 35-member blue ribbon panel on influenza research that included Ron Fouchier and Yoshihiro Kawaoke. Kawaoka. I may be butchering the pronunciation. More about Ron Fouchier and Yoshihiro Kawaoke later. Those are two of the members. The Blue Ribbons panel doesn't mention gain-of-function experiments, but Fauci gave them grants to do just that. Ron Fouchier and Yoshihiro Kawaoke, now infamous gain-of-function research. Ron Fouchier and Yoshihiro Kawaoke's now infamous gain-of-function research showed that through lab manipulation, H5N1 could be altered to become highly transmissible among humans via airborne infection. H5N1 didn't cause disease in humans until this potential had been studied in a lab for several years. Fauci had been funding Kawioki and Fauci's efforts to get bird flu to leap to humans since 1990, and their work was connected to what Shortridge was doing in Hong Kong. For 7 years prior to the first H5N1 outbreak in 1997, paradoxically in Hong Kong, Fauci had been funding Kawioki's gain-of-function bird flu research at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and Kawioki's mentor there, Robert G. Webster, was working and publishing with the aforementioned Kennedy Shortridge. Every year, Webster spent 3 months working with Shortridge at the University of Hong Kong, according to this profile of Webster, which mentions Kawioki as his publisher. Kawioki, by the way, capital K-A-W-A-O-K-A. The most eerie connection between Shortridge and Webster's labs is that the closest known relative of the 1997 Hong Kong H5N1 human outbreak was the avian virus that struck Pennsylvania chickens in 1983 that Yoshihiro Kawioki had studied. According to Time magazine, Webster assigned a young scientist, Yoshihiro Kawioki, to try to figure out how the 1983 virus transformed itself into such a hot, unquote, pathogen. Kawioki, now a professor of virology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, compared the genetic structure of viruses from the first and second waves and found only a single, extremely subtle change in the H gene. The two viruses differed by just one nucleotide, one of 1,700 nucleotides that made up that gene. And more about this milieu. There's also a connection to Ron Fouché through his mentor at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, Jan de Jong, also a colleague and collaborator of Shortridge and Webster's. Kawioki's colleague and mentor Robert G. Webster and Fouché's colleague and mentor Jan de Jong were the first scientists outside of Hong Kong to receive samples of the 1997 H5N1 human outbreak flu from Kennedy Shortridge's lab. De Jong is often credited with being the one who identified the 1997 Hong Kong flu as H5N1, but he did so with a panel of reagents to every type of flu strain yet known, unquote, that had been brought from Webster's lab in Memphis to the National Influenza Center in Rotterdam. Kawioki and Fouché are of post-biological weapons convention era, where the weaponization of pathogens is euphemistically called gain-of-function research, but their older colleagues, De Jong, Shortridge, and Webster, came of age prior to 1972, and their mentors were of the pre-biological weapons convention era, when virologists knowingly and openly engineered viruses for military purposes. Shortridge and Webster were trained by Frank McFarlane Burnett, B-U-R-N-E-P, who served as the Australian Department of Defence's New Weapons and Equipment Development Committee in the 1940s and 1950s. The Federation of American Scientists lists some of the most chilling things Burnett recommended. Burnett said Australia should develop biological weapons that would work in tropical Asia without spreading to Australia's more temperate population centers. Burnett's observations, quote, and I will quote these directly here, specifically to the Australian situation, the most effective counteroffensive to threatened invasion by overpopulated Asiatic countries would be directed towards the destruction of biological or chemical means of tropical food crops and the dissemination of infectious disease capable of spreading in tropical but not under Australian conditions. Now, in addition, this article also notes a frightening relationship between Bio-PsyWar, again, that's the company whose activities in Ukraine were being expedited by Hunter Biden, and that overlaps EcoHealth Alliance, and the selection of Philip Zelikow, an interesting individual who headed up the commission, quote, investigating, unquote, the 9/11 attacks, and was less than vigorous in so doing. He was cited by, among others, Peter Dale Scott in his books The American Deep State and The Road to 9/11 as having had some key omissions in his report. Philip Zelikow also implemented in 2002 basically a document. He crafted a document that implemented the recommendations that were made by the Committee for a New American Century, the Project for a New American Century, in their Rebuilding American Defenses paper. They recommended, among other things, that genetically engineered biological weapons could become a politically useful tool, unquote. And it was Philip Zelikow that encoded basically transferred the recommendations of PNAC's Rebuilding America's Defenses into national security policy in 2002. And again, he was the guy selected to head up the commission that, quote, investigated, unquote, the September 11th attacks. As I've said, that might be appropriately termed the Omission Commission. It was that same Philip Zelikow whom we discussed in, among other programs, for the record 1190, that was selected to head up a commission to look into the origins of the coronavirus. And it turns out that the people who basically helped to come together to create Bio-PsyWar, originally a non-profit called the Global Viral Forecasting Initiative, they were involved with the funding of the commission to be headed up by Philip Zelikow. Again, excerpting the Alexis Bodenmayer paper. In 2008, Google.org committed $30 million to virus hunting and gain-of-function research on potential pandemic pathogens through a project it called Predict and Prevent. At least $5.5 million of that went to Dr. Nathan Wolf's nonprofit Global Virus Forecasting Initiative, which was soon to become the for-profit Bio-PsyWar. One more time. At least $5.5 million of that went to Dr. Nathan Wolf's nonprofit Global Viral Forecasting Initiative, which was soon to become the for-profit Bio-PsyWar. Other GVFI funders at the time included the Skoll Foundation, which also gave $5.5 million, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Merck Research Laboratories, and the U.S. Department of Defense. When the GVFI became the for-profit Bio-PsyWar, Google Ventures continued to invest. In addition, it created a business partnership with Bio-PsyWar, quote, offering its big data expertise to help the company serve its customers and insurers, government agencies, and other organizations by offering them forecasting and risk management tools. In other words, they sell pandemic insurance. As we noted, by the way, one of the emails on Hunter Biden's laptop described Bio-PsyWar as being to the Department of Agriculture as Palantir was to the CIA. Palantir, the alpha predator of the electronic surveillance landscape, headed up by uber-reactionary Peter Thiel, a Trump backer. And I would note that the current Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, worked as a consultant to Palantir during the Trump administration. She also was a key participant in Event 201 in October of 2019 that discussed, again, just hypothetically, a coronavirus-caused global pandemic that would rend the social, political, and economic fabric of every nation on Earth. And coincidentally, not, 2 months later, that is exactly what happened. More about Bio-PsyWar. When the GVFI became the for-profit Bio-PsyWar, let me go back and read more about this. Actually, no, we've already read that section here. When the GVFI became a for-profit MetaBiota, Google Ventures continued to invest. In addition, it created a business partnership with MetaBiota, quote, offering its big data expertise to help the company serve its customers or insurers, government agencies, and other organizations by offering them forecasting and risk management tools. In other words, they sell pandemic insurance. Now that MetaBiota has gotten caught up in the COVID origins scandal, its original investors, Eric Schmidt of Google, Jeffrey Skoll of eBay, Rajiv Shah of the Rockefeller Foundation, formerly USAID Director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, chipped in to fund the COVID Commission Planning Group, a whitewash led by Philip Zelikow, who gave us the 9/11 Commission cover-up. So, again, many of the key funders of what was to become MetaBiota, originally a nonprofit GVFI. Again, Eric Schmidt of Google, Jeffrey Skoll of eBay, Rajiv Shah of the Rockefeller Foundation, formerly USAID Director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They chipped in to fund the COVID Commission Planning Group headed up by Philip Zelikow. It's not mentioned here that another of the funders was none other than Charles Koch, key backer of Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump. Now, another thing that is critical about this, as we noted in some of our discussions of the links between MetaBiota and the EcoHealth Alliance, and something that we spoke about many times in connection with EcoHealth Alliance. Again, that is the main organization involved with funding the research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and its primary funders are the Pentagon and USAID, and its science and medical advisor is David Franz. I identified him as the commanding officer at Fort Detrick. He was the commanding officer of the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. That is, at this point in time, arguably the most important part of Fort Detrick, but not necessarily the commander of Fort Detrick per se. But it turns out that he, as an employee of Southern Research, had been fundamentally involved in the encapsulation research of the anthrax bacteria that was at Fort Detrick and that was used in the anthrax attacks of 2001. Those were pinned on a worker named Bruce Ivins at Fort Detrick, who then conveniently committed suicide. One of the things we spoke about in connection with the aforementioned book Bitten by Chris Newby was the belief on the part of some Fort Detrick veterans whom she worked with, that their colleague Bruce Ivins had been framed for the anthrax attacks. We've also, in a number of programs, including, and especially for the record 1128, looked at an article from 2002 in Vanity Fair called The Message in the Anthrax that notes how Stephen Hatfield, never indicted, by the way, for the anthrax attacks, was long viewed as a person of interest, but everybody in the national security establishment basically said, nah, don't worry about him. The suspicion in these quarters is that Stephen Hatfield is a U.S. intelligence officer, and as such would be completely beyond the law. They basically, the Pentagon, CIA, etc., alphabet soup, does whatever they want. The law does not touch them. But it is more than a little interesting in light of the fact that the anthrax attacks led to an exponential increase in the number of BSL-4 labs in the U.S., up to 12. I think there had previously only been 2. It was the anthrax attacks that did that, and the anthrax that was used in those attacks, a very sophisticated, weaponized anthrax that had been, quote, encapsulated, unquote, was developed by David Franz when he was working at Southern Research. So again, in connection with H5N1, again, the milieu, Ron Fouchier, his supervisor, Jan DeJong, the aforementioned Yoshihiro Kawioki, Kennedy Shortridge, and also Robert Webster, and Frank McFarlane Burnett in Australia. These are people who are heavily involved with H5N1 research, including gain of function research, and Kennedy Shortridge had predicted that the close proximity of humans and animals in South China would lead to some sort of zoonosis outbreak in China. Then surprisingly, not necessarily, but in 1997, the year of the handover of Hong Kong from Great Britain to China, there was an outbreak of human H5N1. So again, bearing in mind the program, the material from numerous programs about Gilead Sciences, the development of Tamiflu, the stockpiling of Tamiflu, again, developed to combat a human H5N1 outbreak that never materialized. Donald Trump profited handsomely from the Pentagon's purchase of that. That is to be reflected against the background, reflected on against the background of this, again, the milieu of Anthony Fauci, Ron Fouchier, his mentor, Jan de Jong, Yoshihiro Kawauki, Robert Webster, Kennedy Shortridge, and also Frank McFarlane Burnett, people inextricably linked with gain-of-function research and also biological warfare. And again, that is a milieu. So those are some of the highlights, maybe lowlights would be a better word. Certainly is depressing. And now I'm going to begin a reading of this very important article. This will certainly take the rest of this program and most of the next. We will also recap some of the information about the April 6th hearing at the UN and the program at the Bharatpur migratory bird refuge in India in the late 60s, funded by the Army, and also the Daniel Samenshine project putting Lone Star picks on the Atlantic Flyway and the subsequent appearance of well-established Lone Star pick colonies as far north as Maine. So we will come back to that later in this program. So, by Alexis Bob Mayer from the Organic Consumers Association of April 22nd of 2022, is bird flu being weaponized? There's been a lot of talk about the conflict in Ukraine causing the release of dangerous pathogens, including highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 from U.S.-funded biolabs. This isn't the first time that H5N1 bioweapons fears have gripped Ukraine. In 2009, when the flu broke out in Ukraine, the official story is that it was H1N1. Rumors circulated that it was H5N1 sprayed via vaccines or aerial spraying. Making the whole H5N1 saga even sketchier is its origin story in the late 1990s. The emergence of the virus in 1997 in Hong Kong was eerily predicted by Kennedy Shortridge, the scientist who would discover it. H5N1 didn't infect humans until Shortridge and his colleagues had been studying its human infection potential in their labs for several years. One more time, because this is critical. Making the whole H5N1 saga even sketchier is its origin story in the late 1990s. The emergence of the virus in 1997 in Hong Kong, parenthetically, the very year of the handover from Hong Kong from Britain to China, was eerily predicted by Kennedy Shortridge, the scientist who would discover it. H5N1 did not infect humans until Shortridge and his colleagues had been studying its human infection potential in their labs for several years. At the time, the natural leap of a flu directly from poultry to humans was so improbable that scientists first suspected that it was the result of contamination from Shortridge's lab. The 1997 H5N1 outbreak in Hong Kong was the first flu to be diagnosed by PCR test. In the next section, does this scenario sound familiar? I have documented all of that below, but there are several even more obvious reasons why, if there is ever a human H5N1 outbreak or vaccination push, we'll know we're in the midst of another pandemic. 1. H5N1 hardly ever infects people. News about highly pathogenic avian influenza usually leads with how deadly it is. Rarely is it mentioned that the disease hardly ever infects people. H5N1 kills more than half the people who get it, but H5N1 has circled the globe for decades, and there have only been 860 human infections worldwide. There has never been an H5N1 pandemic, and no human infection with H5N1 bird flu has ever been identified in the United States. That is an extraordinary safety record given how filthy U.S. factory farms and slaughterhouses are and how fast the infection spreads among crowded birds. So far in 2022, 29 states have reported outbreaks of bird flu in 213 flocks, resulting in the culling of nearly 31 million birds, including almost 5% of egg-laying hens. In 2015, it was even worse, with 50 million birds culled, but there wasn't a single human case. 3. H5N1 is not transmitted person to person. There are only a handful of, quote, possible, unquote, cases worldwide. That is how the CDC puts it. My research suggests that virus hunters like the Gates Foundation's Scott Dowell have stretched the truth in their search for transmissible H5N1. Regardless, the CDC says there is no evidence from those possible cases that spread. One more time. Regardless, the CDC says there is no evidence from those possible cases that spread could be sustained beyond a single transmission. 4. There are no food safety risks associated with H5N1. If farm workers and meat packers don't get bird flu in filthy factory farms or slaughterhouses, it's no surprise the rest of us don't get bird flu from eating raw eggs or handling raw chicken. 5. Anthony Fauci has made significant investments in gain-of-function research to give H5N1 pandemic potential, making it easily transmissible from person to person, and Bill Gates chipped in too. In this article, I lay out the evidence that, 1. Fauci and Gates funded the weaponization of H5N1. 2. Fauci's H5N1 research is ongoing and is being done all over the world, including in Pentagon-funded biolabs in Ukraine. 3. Some of the scariest, most scandal-plagued corporations on the planet are involved in the Ukraine biolabs, from our Millions Against Monsanto nemesis Bayer to the likes of Battelle, B-A-T-T-E-L-L-E, Metabiota, and Southern Research, biodefense contractors variously linked to the Biden family, the origins of COVID-19, and the 2001 anthrax attacks. 4. The U.S. has already authorized and stockpiled a human H5N1 vaccine. Tamiflu, by the way, is a treatment, not a vaccine. Continuing. Christian Westbrook at IceAgeFarmer.com is warning that bird flu will be the next human pandemic and that the catastrophe is being engineered to usher in the post-meat, post-farmer world that Bill Gates aspires to. Again, I don't know, that's what he says, but again, put the question mark by that. As Alexis Bodnayer then notes, continuing, I sincerely hope he's wrong, but it's hard to be optimistic when people like Robert Redfield, who was CDC director under Trump and is known for his suspicion that COVID-19 originated in a lab, are coming out of the woodwork to make the same eerie prediction. We looked at Robert Redfield in the June 2021 Vanity Fair article. And again, he is an advocate, basically an exponent of the lab leak theory. Continuing, the next section, Fauci and Gates funded the weaponization of H5N1. By the way, Bill Gates himself has some very dark things about him. That too has been, I think, exaggerated by Team Trump and their enablers, talking about, microchips being injected into people's bloodstreams via vaccines and so forth. There is no need to do that. People can be tracked very effectively by a number of different technologies, including and especially the very smartphones they think are so important and so delightful. Basically, those things are very effective surveillance devices. But again, I think the gross exaggeration, much of it, frankly, of 911 controlled demolition ludicrousness has unfortunately worked to the benefit of Bill Gates, and that there are some very insidious things about him, but not putting microchips in vaccines. Continuing here, Fauci and Gates funded the weaponization of H5N1. Fauci and Gates figured out how to get scientists to participate in biological weapons research with a clean conscience. They pay them to, 1, believe pandemics are caused by pathogens that don't infect humans, 2, use genetic engineering and synthetic biology to, quote, predict, unquote, how those pathogens will infect humans. In his 2006 piece, The Science, How a Human Pandemic Could Start, Scott Dowell wrote, quote, while rare instances of H5N1 passing from person to person have been documented, there is no indication that it can do so efficiently. That could change. A series of mutations or a genetic reassortment event, a type of gene swapping among viruses, could enable H5N1 to spread efficiently among humans, triggering a pandemic. H5N1 may evolve into something that's easily spread through coughing, sneezing, or contact with contaminated hands, unquote. In his wisdom, Fauci decided to see if he could make that happen in the lab. As director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, Fauci commissioned 2 gain-of-function research teams with grants titled Pandemic Potential of H5N1 Influenza Viruses and, quote, Understanding the Emergence of Highly Pathogenic Avian Influenza Viruses. Gates chipped in too, with grants 48339 and OPPGH5383 from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In parentheses, Ice Age farmers Westbrook found a lot more documentation of Gates's funding of gain-of-function research to make highly pathogenic avian influenza even more pathogenic and transmissible. The scientists Fauci chose to lead the H5N1 teams, Ron Fouchier at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and Yoshihiro Kawioki at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Tokyo, were scientists Fauci had funded since 1990 under grants with titles including Influenza Virus Assembly. In February of 2006, Fauci convened a one-day in-house, quote, NIAID Influenza Research Summit to identify influenza research priorities. In September, he opened up the topic to a 35-member, quote, blue ribbon panel on influenza research, unquote, that included Fouchier and Kawioki. The blue ribbon panel's report doesn't mention gain-of-function experiments, but Fauci gave them grants to do just that. Fouchier and Kawioki's now infamous gain-of-function research showed that, through lab manipulation, H5N1 could be altered to become highly transmissible among humans via airborne infection. And again, we've spoken about the gain-of-function research on H5N1 in a number of programs early in the series on the Bio-PsyWar apocalypse, dealing with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, COVID-19. Continuing, next section. Did Fauci and Gates' weaponized H5N1 end up in Ukraine? In this video from Ice Age Farmer, and then, by the way, there are links in the written description, Christian Westbrook talks about Russia's claim that the U.S. funded Ukraine experiments with engineered strains of bird flu that could kill 50% of humanity. Russia's accusation was presented to the United Nations. Russia's information on U.S. funding of pathogen research in Ukraine was gleaned from public sources. One more time, because anything Russia says now is being, well, that's lies, that's propaganda, and if you say something that comes from Russia, then you're automatically a Russian propagandist, or a Russian dupe, or a Russian agent, you name it. Cold War 2.0 is being accompanied by McCarthyism 2.0, and the man is it kicking in. Russia's accusation was presented to the United Nations. Russia's information on U.S. funding of pathogen research in Ukraine was gleaned from public sources. Robbie Martin of Media Roots Radio has compiled the documentation in a searchable database housed by Our Hidden History. Martin did a great podcast on the subject, quote, "Is the U.S. making weapons under the guise of biodefense in Ukraine and elsewhere with Gumby?" And again, there are links in this. As Igor Kirillov, the head of the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Protection Troops of the Russian Armed Forces, has reported, the Pentagon-funded pathogens projects in Ukraine were labeled UP for Ukraine Project and given numbers starting with UP1. Currently, the project lead for U.S.-funded H5N1 research in Ukraine, the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, refers to it as UP4 or Ukraine Project 4, is Denise Muzyka, M-U-Z-Y-K-A. This is all very well documented, and the U.S. has not denied it, although it insists it is in full compliance with the Biological Weapons Convention. Ukraine is a hub for Pentagon Biolab funding, and biotech and pharmaceutical companies are going where the government contracts are. Our millions against Monsanto nemesis Bayer is sidling up to the trough, too. We will continue with a reading of this article in our next program. Do remember the various links I've spoken about, including the Patreon site, where I can basically cover a lot more material than I can in a weekly 1-hour broadcast. Also note the comments that are made by Parafractal mostly, and sometimes by other people. Again, there is way too much going on for me to possibly cover it in a 1-hour broadcast. That's why Patreon. And the comments, most of them made by Parafractal, are very important. I believe the link enabling you to subscribe is no longer operative. You can just go to the comments themselves and visit the site on a regular basis. In any event, this concludes For the Record program number 1248, The Ukraine War Meets the Oswald Institute of Virology, Part 1. This is being recorded on June 10th of the year 2022. I'm Dave Emery. Have fun.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. First, I should like to express my gratitude to the radio and television networks for the opportunities they have given me over the years to bring reports and messages to our nation. My special thanks go to them for the opportunity of addressing you this evening. 3 days from now, after half a century in the service of our country, I shall lay down the responsibilities of office as, in traditional and solemn ceremony, the authority of the presidency is vested in my successor. This evening, I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. Like every other citizen, I wish the new president and all who will labor with him Godspeed. I pray that the coming years will be blessed with peace and prosperity for all. Our people expect their president and the Congress to find essential agreement on issues of great moment, the wise resolution of which will better shape the future of the nation. My own relations with the Congress, which began on a remote and tenuous basis when, long ago, a member of the Senate appointed me to West Point, have since ranged to the intimate during the war and immediate post-war period, and finally to the mutually interdependent during these past 8 years. In this final relationship, the Congress and the administration have, on most vital issues, cooperated well. to serve the nation good rather than mere partisanship, and so have assured that the business of the nation should go forward. So my official relationship with the Congress ends in a feeling, on my part, of gratitude that we have been able to do so much together. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. 3 of these involved our own country. Despite these holocausts, America is today the strongest, the most influential, and most productive nation in the world. Understandably proud of this preeminence, we yet realize that America's leadership and prestige depend not merely upon our unmatched material progress, riches, and military strength, but on how we use our power in the interest of world peace and human betterment. Throughout America's adventure in free government, our basic purposes have been to keep the peace, to foster progress in human achievement, and to enhance liberty, dignity, and integrity among peoples and among nations. To strive for less would be unworthy of a free and religious people. Any failure traceable to arrogance or our lack of comprehension or readiness to sacrifice would inflict upon us grievous hurt, both at home and abroad. Progress toward these noble goals is persistently threatened by the conflict now engulfing the world. It commands our whole attention, absorbs our very beings. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. Unhappily, the danger it poses promises to be of indefinite duration. To meet it successfully, there is call for not so much the emotional and transitory sacrifices of crisis, but rather those which enable us to carry forward steadily, surely, and without complaint, the burdens of a prolonged and complex struggle with liberty, the stake. Only thus shall we remain, despite every provocation, on our charted course toward permanent peace and human betterment. Crises there will continue to be. In meeting them, whether foreign or domestic, great or small, there is a recurring temptation to feel that some spectacular and costly action could become the miraculous solution to all current difficulties. A huge increase in newer elements of our defenses, development of unrealistic programs to cure every ill in agriculture, a dramatic expansion in basic and applied research. These and many other possibilities, each possibly promising in itself, may be suggested as the only way to the road we wish to travel. But each proposal must be weighed in the light of a broader consideration, the need to maintain balance in and among national programs. Balance between the private and the public economy. Balance between the cost and hoped for advantages. Balance between the clearly necessary and the comfortably desirable. Balance between our essential requirements as a nation and the duties imposed by the nation upon the individual. Balance between actions of the moment and the national welfare of the future. Good judgment seeks balance in progress. Lack of it eventually finds imbalance and frustration. The record of many decades stands as proof that our people and their government have, in the main, understood these truths and have responded to them well in the face of threat and stress. But threats, new in kind or degree, constantly arise. Of these I mention 2 only. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society. Another factor in maintaining balance involves the element of time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. During the long lane of the history yet to be written, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. Such a confederation must be one of equals. The weakest must come to the conference table with the same confidence as do we, protected as we are by our moral, economic, and military strength. That table, though scarred by many past frustrations, cannot be abandoned for the certainty agony of disarmament of the battlefield. Disarmament with mutual honor and confidence is a continuing imperative. Together we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess that I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. As one who has witnessed the horror and the lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization, which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. Happily, I can say that war has been avoided. Steady progress toward our ultimate goal has been made, but so much remains to be done. As a private citizen, I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road. So in this, my last good night to you as your president, I thank you for the many opportunities you have given me for public service in war and in peace. I trust in that service, you find some things worthy. As for the rest of it, I know you will find ways to improve performance in the future. You and I, my fellow citizens, need to be strong in our faith that all nations under God will reach the goal of peace with justice. May we be ever unswerving in devotion to principle, confident but humble with power, diligent in pursuit of the nation's great goals. To all the peoples of the world, I once more give expression to America's prayerful and continuing aspiration. We pray that peoples of all faiths, all races, all nations may have their great human needs satisfied, that those now denied opportunity shall come to enjoy it to the full, that all who yearn for freedom may experience its spiritual blessings. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility, that all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth, and that in the goodness of time, all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love. Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night.